So, look, the next topic is going to be about optimising the spring production. So a bit sort of rolling nicely with some of the stuff that Neil was talking about around that grazing management and trying to optimise that one animal health stuff, but also optimise that production as well. And then when can we access some silage as well? So a couple of the topics we're going to talk about is we want to achieve that 2 to 3 leaf or canopy closure for our pre-grazing when we go into these paddocks, but we also want to achieve a 4 to 6 residual centimetre. And there's a lot of research around that backs all this stuff up, so that's what we're going to go through now. Why does pasture respond in spring? We're going to talk about that. A quick discussion. Most of it's all weather related, but there's some management stuff that you've done in the last 3 months that will allow you the opportunity to be able to gain on that. Adjusting the rotation, as I said, based on the rules of the ryegrass growing, feed allocation, and also how to recognise the true surplus and what can we do with that. And just a quick little discussion, and interested for people to weigh in on this as well. And sometimes it's just a word, but sometimes it's really important just to make sure that we are all on the same page when we come to this. So the difference between locking up, paddocks as to what used to be sort of done, and banking paddocks to be flexible and also maintain quality and that production going forward. So pasture response in spring, look, as we get more daylight and increased temperatures, we're going to drive that leaf appearance of the ryegrass, which is really important for the management point of view, which I'll talk about in a second. The plant species and cultivar, like sometimes this gets missed, and I've been on farms where, the resources are there. We've got some good temperatures, we've got moisture, we've got nutrition, but if they haven't got the right species or the cultivar to make most of that, there's no point going any further with it. You're better off to focus on what you can get the production out of. Plant population and competition. A lot of this stuff comes back to your management for the last 3 or 4 months, especially if you've been overgrazing through winter due to issues. You will lose plant numbers, you lose tillers, you lose root growth, and quite often I'll see in spring when we get to a dry period like we are at the moment, and we've got ryegrass plants being pulled out by the roots from the cows, and that's because they haven't got a nice root structure underneath, and that's due to mainly a lot of the grazing management happening on through winter. And we need moisture and soil nutrition. So to step through, first of all, our rules. So we want the 2 to 3 leaf or canopy closure, okay, when we're going into paddocks to graze. So we're going to go into a paddock and graze. This steps through the reasons we have those rules, okay, which is really, really important. So being able to set up your rotation length should be based on these rules. And this here goes through a recovery of a plant from grazing. So you look at the top there, you've got the first leaf coming through. That's been grazed, and that's the first leaf that's coming through. Then you've got the second leaf, and then third, and then fourth leaf coming across. And then the important bit here, though, is in that first one leaf, when it's starting to recover from grazing, as you can see down the bottom there, that's water-soluble carbohydrates. That's basically plant energy, okay? So the plant doesn't have the ability to photosynthesize enough to produce leaf, so it needs to draw on its own energy, okay? So to pull that out of the stem, and also pulls it out of the roots. So that is why, from a point of being able to get a plant to recover and keep growing, it's important not to graze before this period, because the plant has not yet stored any carbohydrates to be able to handle the grazing up until it gets up to the 2-leaf stage. Once we get to that 2-leaf stage, we know that we've stored some of those carbohydrates, and that's why we ask that if we can get to 2-leaf stage, it's going to be best for the plant, okay, to be able to handle another grazing, and that's what we want to achieve. Once we go past that 3-leaf stage, as you can see on the slide 4 there, the oldest leaf, which is your first leaf, which is taken energy and nutrition and everything else, starts to decay and die. So if we allow that to happen, we're going to lose quality of feed. Okay, so instantly our quality of feed is going to start to deteriorate, and we've also lost a period of growth from being able to remove that to get regrowth again. So we'll lose overall total production.
So Josh, what happens to the stems at this time if we're going out past 3 leaves as well?
Yeah, that's right. So if we scoot, so I'll cover that in the canopy closure part. But so that's a 2 to 3 leaf, and now this is canopy closure. So exactly what Neil says, if we start to go past canopy closure, okay, the stem will start to elongate, okay. Now that stem will elongate and you'll start getting daughter tillers, okay, that will come out halfway up the stem. These are your new plants. These are the plants that we want to be putting down roots. These are plants that we want for the next grazing or the next cut of silage, especially if you've got a tangen or hybrid or perennial type ryegrasses. These plants will keep on being vegetative and keep you quality feed, if we get rainfall or if you've got irrigation right up to Christmas. So keeping that canopy open and allowing the light to get down in there will also allow those roots to get down and not have to elongate and lose those plants. Because if we come along and graze that plant and remove that tiller, we've lost that plant, or if we cut it for silage, we've lost that plant to be able to come back and recover to give us feed going forward. The other reasons we don't want to go past canopy closure is just shading of those new tillers. They will abort, okay? So as you can see, they're starting to go yellow down in the bottom of those stands. And the other one is quality. So as soon as we start to see this yellowing and the crop starting to go yellow below the grazing point, we're starting to lose quality. And we really, if we've got high production animals, we're not going to be asking for those animals to eat that feed. So we would have to, potentially do something to fix that, but we want to try and keep on top of it. This is probably the biggest risk we're going to have going into spring. If we do get some decent rainfall, we're trying to keep on top of this. And just in that last example that Tom had with Neil, if they didn't rectify their residuals and they just kept on letting it go out of control, you'd end up with something like this. So that's pre-grazing. So pre-grazing, that's the rules we want to try and achieve, is that 2 to 3 leaf or canopy closure, okay? And that's really important for trying to get the quality and the production going forward. The other one we need to really focus on is our residuals, okay? So the ideal residual for a ryegrass plant is 4 to 6 centimetres, somewhere in there. This is really important because that's where, in that 4 to 6 centimetres and below, is where those carbohydrates I was talking about before are stored, and then in the roots as well. And if we remove that, that doesn't give the plant enough energy to recover from the grazing. Okay, so in a scenario up here, you can see this is a cross-section of our pasture, for an example. We've got a cow pat there in the middle, and you see in between the cow pats, like Neil was showing in that photos at the start, we've got like a 1 to 3 centimetre residual, and we're overgrazing. As you can see from the photo down the bottom, there's just some cuts that I've done on some demos before. You can replicate this over and over and over again. But if your residual is going down to 2 centimetres and 3 centimetres, as you can just see there in those cuts, you're doing yourself in yield, and the plant can't have enough energy to grow that first leaf back. Okay, once it's past that first leaf, it will then start to store its carbohydrates, but it's a exponential loss, because if we've got a smaller first leaf, we'll have a smaller second leaf and a smaller third leaf. Yes,
so
Neil?
Josh, just to clarify that diagram, that's the regrowth in the same time.
Yep.
The period based on the previous residual being 2 centimetres, 3 centimetres, 4, 5, and 6.
Yes, correct, mate. Yeah, and you can see there's not a lot of difference between the 4 to 6, but once we get to 3 and 2, we've dramatically affected that regrowth in that rotation. Affected. And look, I do this a lot in winter because sometimes we struggle with feed availability and trying to get the amount to feed the cows, and sometimes they're a bit long and we overgraze. Sometimes I go out and fence off a section so they don't overgraze that part, and come back and have a look at it, the next grazing rotation, and you can see twice as much feed on there, and it's quite substantial when you do overgraze, the damage that can be done for that next grazing. So what does it look like when we get it right? So this is about setting ourselves up so that when things do come good, if we do get some extra rain or etc., we have the ability for these plants to recover and get some production. So if we're getting an ideal, we want that 4 to 6 centimetres in between those cow pats, and trying to get that, and you can even see there's the feed wedge away from that cow pat. We're not asking the animals to eat into it, into that lower quality stuff. As you can see up the top there in the overgraze, we're actually missing potentially an opportunity there, Neil, to feed these animals something to get some production.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, Josh. By the time we see them eating into those sharp shoulders, it's probably going to be useful for regrowth later. But what we're going to see is, these cows by definition are hungry.
Yeah.
And when I see that, it certainly says that there's potential for more production in the cows when they're eating 100%. That savagely.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. So what does it look like? This is the question that Sam had. How do we start to recognise then the true surplus, and what are some of the decisions around that? And say we do get some rain or improved decisions or improved conditions, we'll start to see the residuals rise. So we've got the rotation length right, as by the rules that we talked about before. But if we start to have more feed than the cows can physically eat for whatever reason, we'll start to see these residuals rise. So that gives us an opportunity to make some decisions around what we want to do. So anything sort of, once we get above that 6, we're starting to waste feed in between there. Okay, so as long as that's quality feed that should have been eaten by the animals that we could get production out of, if we're wrong today, we're wrong tomorrow. So we should be looking to make some decisions and challenge ourselves as to what we can do about that. So in this scenario, this is our feed wedge. So if we've got everything right and we're under control at the moment, okay, so we've got our 2 to 3 leaf canopy closure on our paddocks. So this is an indication of our grazing area at the moment. You've got your farms along there in your bars. We've got a paddock that we're about to go into on the right, okay, which is our 2 to 3 leaf or canopy closure. And then we've got 4 to 6 centimetres in our residuals. Everything's happy days. What we see happen is once pasture or we get a response from fertiliser or conditions start to improve with moisture, we'll start to see that we are growing more feed than the cows can eat in those cells. So then we need to start to make some decisions. So the quicker we can get onto that and utilise that feed, the better it'll be from a profit point of view, but also from a management point of view, not having to top and deal with it, etc., etc. So just to run through an example, and Sam, if you're on, I might get you to answer a couple of questions here, just to add what your thoughts would be. Let's say we've got a paddock that's, our number paddock is 5. That paddock has 6 hectares in it. Okay, so we're on a 20-day rotation at the moment, and the whole farm is on 60 hectares of rotation. So if we sit there and say, right, this paddock that we've just come out of, okay, things have improved. We've had some rain, we've had some good fertility. Okay, things are starting to improve, and we've gone through, the first feed, the second feed, and we've wasted a bit of feed, and we've gone through the third and fourth, and we've noticed the residuals are starting to rise. Okay, so those residuals have started to rise, up to 8 centimetres, 9 centimetres, whatever they are. And we're sitting there going, I need to make some decisions about utilising that feed that I've wasted in the paddock. What are some of the decisions we could make? So Sam, what's some of the decisions that you could use now going forward to say, I can recognise that my residuals are rising. What should we do to rectify that?
Yeah, thanks, Josh, and g'day everyone. So this is quite relevant. I've actually just looked at what we're feeding in the dairy and how much grain we're giving them, and so I've taken the last few days. I've taken just a kilo of grain out of the dairy just to try. We've gone from about a 30-day rotation down to 25. So giving them a little bit more pasture, so we want to make sure they're utilising that. So the first thing is trying to remove that grain a little bit. Obviously not too much. I probably wouldn't want to take more than, we're feeding 6 kilos now. I'm not confident enough to go lower than that. So the next step would probably be looking at taking paddocks out for silage.
Yeah, right. So first up, your first decision there is to reduce supplement. So you've said, right, I've got potential here of quality feed. I've reduced the supplement to try and eat more of that grass that we have available. All right. So there's other options we can look at as well. So there's things like other livestock. So we sit there and go, and I was only talking to a farmer yesterday that realised that he's got some extra feed that he's wasted behind in a couple of paddocks. So he's put other livestock in there to deal with that. Then he's got some heifers that he's whacking in there, which is still good quality feed. They just got their allocations wrong, so they're putting that in there to deal with that. Other methods, we can use mechanical ways to deal with it. Neil, pre-mowing even can be an option to deal with that. Also, mulching behind the cows to reset that residual is also another option. But so there's a lot of options we can look at, but let's say that we've reduced all the supplement we want to do, Sam, exactly what you said, and now you're trying to work out, when do I actually know I've got a true surplus? Well, if you've reduced your supplement, okay, and you haven't got anything else to eat it, and you've got a fair bit of feed there that you're saying you lost, and in this scenario, in this paddock 5, what's the next best thing we could have done to get another feed out of that paddock, isn't it? All right, so we've got 4 feeds out of it. What we're actually saying is we should have got 5 feeds, okay? So we can sit there and say, right, let's what's that look like if we had got 5 feeds? And this is how we can work out a way of how much silage we can cut. Okay, so if we sit there and say, right, now we've got paddock 5, it's 6 hectares. Okay, so you got now, instead of feeding 1.5 hectares, we're going to feed 1.2 hectares. Right, this paddock's been done already, but the good thing about it is you're measuring what you've already done, and then you can make some decisions going forward. So the good thing about that, you can, rotation right tool can do this sort of stuff for you. Okay, but if you look at the numbers, you sit there and say, right, we still want to stick to a 20-day rotation, okay, because the rotation is not the issue. It's the amount of feed that we're feeding. We've dropped our supplements back to where we want them to be. So we say, right, we should be feeding 1.2 hectares now on the 20-day rotation. That should give us 40 feeds, okay, 2 feeds per day. That means that we need 48 hectares in our grazing rotation. So instantly we can sit there from our 60 hectares that we were on and say, potentially we have 12 hectares we can bank, conserve, feed to other stock, or be flexible about. But at least instantly we've made a decision to go, right, we're going to go to 1.2 hectares per feed rather than the 1.5 we're at. And then see, the next day, you'll get feedback on that. Is that over it? Is it too much? Other options, like Neil says, is you can use your growth rate per day. You can go out and measure. If you're measuring grass, you can divide it by your herd. There's a lot of ways to do it, but that's just one example. So to finish up, I'd like to say, keep an eye on your pre-grazing. So keep it at 2 to 3 leaf, okay, or canopy closure. Your residuals, if they're rising, reduce supplements to an acceptable rate that you're happy with. Utilise that feed if you can. Look when you've got that true surplus, so you've already got that residual rising, so now you have a true surplus. Then go through which way you want to deal with that true surplus and make the decision that day.
Gosh, fantastic. I mean, one of the things we'll commonly see when we visit farms, if we've had explosive growth, is that they'll often have the herd chasing the pasture and the pasture's continuing to get away.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. So look, in that situation, I guess one of the things to think about is just we can, and it's just a reality. Sometimes it will get away.
Yep.
If that happens, I think we often recommend, well, let's go onto the pasture that's the quality that you really think is optimal now.
Yep.
And that might be with 10 days grazing on the other side of it that isn't going to be utilised.
Yep.
So in that situation, say, well, look, everything, the other side of that stuff that's optimal, you should be cutting immediately and taking that as silage, because you're just not going to get there with the cows. You're just going to continually chase this wedge wider and wider and wider. But I guess it's being confident to make the call. There's some things that can make us really confident to make the call. If the season's warming up and the days are getting longer, if the fertility profile's good, if there's a bit of rain around and we've got a good moisture profile, you know that if you go that little bit harder and take that extra feed out and get that rotation under control, it is going to grow back. And it's having that confidence to read your season, I think, which is really, really important.
Yeah, that's 100% right, Neil. And that confidence and in your decision making is really important. And then knowing that we don't have to worry about getting a bank of feed in front of us. It's about looking at the paddocks that are in front of you today, and they're telling you everything you need to know. Again, if the residuals are decreasing, okay, so look, if we do, and it could be happening now, especially with the dry conditions, have a look at bringing paddocks, if you have pulled them out, back into the rotation. So that's a good thing about banking paddocks, you can pull them back in. Increase supplements, if you can get a response out of it and make money, and look after your pasture so it's ready to go. On-off feed is another option. So if they are starting to overgraze, but you can't add any more feed and you want to pull them off onto a loping area or into a shed, etc., that's a good option so you don't overgraze those residuals. Another one which is really good and quite often used is that once a day feeding, and just having that one 1 feeding per day on grass. That gives you a larger area to be able to feed. So it's a more meaningful feed and useful. And they're not walking a long distances to have a small amounts of feed. So just quickly, locking up paddocks. So if we're locking up paddocks for silage or hay and things like that, it's usually turned because they want to lock it up for multiple rotations, get a bulk of feed. This will reduce quality. You lose your flexibility about being able to bring it back into rotation because the quality's not there for the milking herd, and you'll lose production because you haven't actually harvested the quality feed and allow it to respond, and you also lose tillers and growth in the following cuts or grazing periods. Where if we bank paddocks, okay, so if we bank paddocks so that they just get pulled out and they should be grazed or should be cut for silage rather, or hay when they're ready to be grazed, that's the optimal. So you keep the quality in it. Can be added back in. So if you've got them banked and they're ready and you're starting to run out of feed, well, if you haven't cut them, you can pull them back into the rotation, no worries, and feed them off. So it allows it to be flexible. And you're optimising your production and your regrowth and your quality of feed. So this is the goal. At the end of the day, this is what we're trying to achieve, right? We're trying to level this feed intake out. We're trying to make the most of the good times, and we'll probably reiterate this across most of the sections today. But making use of the opportunities when they come. If we look at our spring here, sometimes we can have 2, 3, 4 springs. Quite often rather than just one. And, I'd say we've already had one of them in August or in late July. We had a big, rapid growth, and then we'll go through a dry period, which happens. But, quite often we can get a good rainfall now and we'll be back into it again. So it's not like some other areas that sort of have just a true spring. It's being able to have your plants in the right conditions so that if we do get these opportunities, we can make the most of them. Okay, if there's any couple of questions on that sort of stuff before I move forward.
Terrific, Josh. I think spring is when it rains, and in the Hunter Valley, spring is probably when you turn the irrigation on.
Yeah, that's right.
Just a question surrounding that, Josh.
Yep.
We've got a block of barley that really we weren't going to plant in the first place, and the unfortunate events have resulted that we're still milking and a bit short on feed. We're sort of weighing up whether we keep it to get a bit more bulk to be able to, supply the cows for a bit longer, and get one big grazing out of it, or try and push it a bit harder and get 2 grazings. What's your sort of thoughts on?
Yeah, good question there, Lachlan. And on your cereals, it's a really important time of year to go through that scenario. So there's no right or wrong way that you want to do it. It's just looking at you need to look at the growth point. Okay, so I'm assuming now it would have already turned reproductive. Okay, so to look at that, you need to look at the stem of the plant, okay, of your tillers as well, and see how many of those tillers have turned reproductive. So you can have a look. I just have a look at the nodes, and I can follow up with you after this as well. But you have a look at the nodes, and you have a look to see where the seed head obviously will be in that stem as well. If that's happened, if you do graze it, that will be the last cut or graze that you'll get off it anyway. Okay, so it won't actually recover from that. So if you want to try and maximise, the opportunity for quality and yield, somewhere for me, I'd stick towards that flag leaf seed head emergence. You need to have a look to make sure if it's a bearded types or whether they're non-bearded types in terms of if you want the seed head to come out. The other time that's probably optimal is that milky dough stage. But if you get it wrong and you go past that milky dough stage, you can definitely lose a lot of quality there as well. So, Neil, you might have some comments, but also I'd probably like to, Neil Griffiths, if you're there, I think I've seen you said you were going to log in. You'd probably have some comments around that stuff as well. So I'll probably open it up to both of you.
I'll look, just quickly in case Neil is here, I just can't see the list. Look, I think it comes back to when it was planted too, because if this was a late sowing, it still may be quite vegetative. Yeah, I'd encourage you to look at some of the stems, but probably pull out a plant rather than just look at 1 or 2 stems, because quite often you might have 1 or 2 of them sending up a node in a vegetative, a reproductive point. But a lot of the other tillers around the base still might be quite young and fresh, okay, and haven't started to elongate or send up a node. So pull up your plant, and if you've got a balance of tillers down there that are still relatively short, 2, 3, 4 leaf, okay, and not sending up a flag leaf, then there's a pretty high probability that if you graze those off now, you'll get another flush of regrowth.
Yeah.
Okay. If most of them are showing up a reproductive node, then if you graze below that reproductive node, and basically if you cut the stem on a cereal and the stem's hollow, that tiller won't regrow. Okay, if you cut the stem of a cereal and you see just leaf and cross section, you're going to get regrowth from it. And it's a matter of having a look at the balance of the plant. If the majority of it's the latter, then you're going to get good regrowth. If the majority of it's reproductive, you're just going to be pushing forward now, and it's not going to come back anyway.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Neil
Thank
Griffiths,
you.
are you there? Or?
Yeah, Josh, I guess looking at the sort of feed that you want as well. So if you want high quality feed, protein and a bit of energy, you go as quick as you can. All the comments about regrowth apply. If you're looking at conserving it as either baled or pit silage, you've got a few other choices. If you let it, and I guess it's thinking to the future, if you're trying to set yourself up for the next drought when you might want some fibre, then you can let it go more mature. But we spend most of our time trying to avoid that, which means go early if you want the quality. It's with the comments before about regrowth, it's probably not going to happen. What you've got is the biggest thing you've got. So it's volume versus quality, and when you think you might want to use that feed going forward.
Yeah, good comments.
The late harvest thing also is really only that's a direct chop into the pit type option. If you're baling it, then you probably don't want any grain in there, etc.
I think that's particularly pertinent with some of the rodent issues we might face this year.
No, that's fantastic. And Lockie, thanks for the question, mate. That's great.
Yeah,
Thanks for the help.
Quick question, Josh, if you've got time.
Yep. Yes, John.
Clearly, making the decision to lock up paddocks for silage is based on sort of a model that you've got around future growth rates and how your comfort levels in locking up those paddocks.
Yep.
Any thoughts on, in the season we're in, trade-off against being overly optimistic or overly cautious in your decision to lock up paddocks for silage?
Yeah. So the biggest thing, and unless you sort of got some runoff blocks, which might be happening, is I'll scoot back to that comment that I made before about locking up versus banking. Locking up paddocks can be fraught with danger. But exactly what you're talking about there is about exactly what Neil was talking about. Is it depends the way you see the future and the way you want to see your risk. But definitely at the moment, with all the the La Nino talk, even when we look at the next 2 to 3 months of rain being sort of 70 to 80% above average, they're talking. So don't hold it to me, but it'd be nice if it happens. All the signs are there, and I guess that's why I want to put emphasis on making sure your plants are in a position and your paddocks are in a position to respond to that. So when it happens, in terms of being optimistic about one way or the other, each farmer will have their ways of different risks, which I often see. I see some farmers that are quite happy to take out of a third of the farm and only worry about what's in front of them really early. And some farmers like to have a feed wedge in front of them. I much prefer the first option, dealing with what's in front of you. And, what happens after that is uncontrolled until you get some rainfall, et cetera. But definitely, with the good conditions that are there, we're going to talk a little bit about supply of some fertiliser and bits and pieces, which is an issue. So it's really important to make sure we manage that as well, because if we're ready to go and we've got the option, we have some good rainfall, we've got good temperatures, you've got your plants in a spot to respond. The next thing is, have you locked away or got some fertiliser available to be able to optimise and maximise that? And that'll be a good discussion a bit later on as well.
Yeah. Can I look the other thing I think you'd balance into that? Sorry, Jonathan. Just the other thing to balance into that discussion are your alternatives this year, I think, and with respect to do we eat everything we possibly can and maximise production at the moment and maximise margin over feed costs, with the view that if we're going to have cows going short of feed, that might be putting us in a less optimal position, because at the moment, I think the thing we need to be looking at also is what's happening on the other side of the mountains, okay, which is reasonably good prospect of supply of forage at reasonable pricing. Quality might be problematic, but we can deal with that. I think there's going to be enough of it out there that we'll be able to pick enough good quality stuff to get. So I guess if we're looking at balancing that decision making, we should also be looking at some of those external factors as well. And in particular, if I can bring in good quality forage for 250 to 280, 300 a tonne dry matter, I might be better off erring on the side of eating a lot more of what I've got rather than making cows go hungry just to make silage.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, no, that's probably where I was heading around the external sort of factors as well, taking that in consideration, either to, if you're overly sort of optimistic on what you lock up, whether you've got an ability to, fill that gap in the short term, or pitch down the, if you choose to graze it now, what's your options for bringing in extra feed later on?
Yeah, very good. So now I'm just going to hand over to Peter, who's going to have a bit of a discussion about the farming forecaster that's across the area now, which is pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah, okay, Josh. This is something some of you will be familiar with, some haven't. It's a system of soil moisture probes. They go down to about 1 metre depth, and you can see the dots up there. There's a network of them right across the Hunter region. There's another whole network down in the southeast around Young and Burrawa, those sort of areas, been around for a while, and we're just copying what they do. You can see the graph up the top right there. It just shows the different moisture readings based on depth, those different colours, and down below there's the percentages there, that sort of around 10 centimetres, the 10 to 20, 40. So you can see what's sort of happening and how over time that, in that drying period, the moisture always is removed from the top, and then the roots go down to the bottom. And what it's doing, it's just giving you something to have a look at. Particularly, I was looking at this back in July, and you can just see, we knew things were drying out, but it's giving you some sort of objective measure on where we're up to with soil moisture. And you can look around the different districts. There's one at Sam's, there's one at Bungay, Gary Soper, and Andrew Smith and Michael Fraser. So they're all in there on dryland, and you can look at rainfall across the region, just see how other people got on, and just get it, just a bearing on where things are heading. There is talk about extending this further up into your area, Luke, not by us but by the north coast and down south. And the next thing we're working on, and they use this in the down south, is that we can use model predictions of what might happen in the next 30 days in terms of growth, given historic rainfall or whatsoever. So we're not quite there yet, but some of that is just around saying, giving you a bit more confidence in the next 30 days. I'm going to get favourable conditions for growth, so therefore I can probably get pretty good responses to nitrogen, and that's one of the main things. So we've had a few hiccups. The flood did a bit of damage to Sam's, and we had to get that fixed. And we're only just putting it up and trying to train some of those guys that have got it on Friday. But just be aware of it. It's developing. It's useful. You can actually look up the home page if you're in, say, using Safari on an Apple, and you can put it on your home screen and dial up. Just put in the closest one of these things for you. All the ones around here are on Kikuyu ryegrass pastures, so hopefully they'll be relevant. The ones obviously further west are more dry land, down around Tocal, there's quite a variation. But I specifically, and Dags has been involved in the funding of this. Yeah, mostly dairy pastures, because that's where the decisions are made. So I think that's
awesome. Great.
Yeah.
So look, I think I'm definitely going to use it, especially if you start to use fertilisers and things like that, and you're starting to discuss whether do I have moisture there to grow some feed. We'll talk about that when we get down to the ends about fertiliser, but these are some of the discussions or questions you need to ask yourself whether you're going to get the response. Very good, Pete. Thanks very much.